Jay, and welcome back to my channel. On this channel, we talk about all things lifestyle, health, and wellness. So if you have not already, be sure to hit that subscribe button below so that you can keep up to date with all of my content and all of my new videos. Now let's jump right on it. So if you've been following my channel, then you know that the last video I put out was about me having hand surgery. So I had the hand surgery. It was supposed to be a 1 week recovery time, and that quickly turned into almost a month of recovery time and counting. I just had some issues with the healing process, and it's just been a bit of a mess. But with me being off work, or when I was off work recovering, I was actually able to have some time to get back into therapy. This year has been kind of a lot for me. I've just had a lot on my plate. A lot of things going on simultaneously and seemingly nonstop. And so I just felt like, hey, I'm off all this time resting and recovering from surgery. I might as well do something for me. And so I got back into therapy. And so I just wanted to talk about that, a little bit about my experiences so far with it, and hopefully encourage someone else to get in therapy if you think it's something that will be helpful for you. It definitely has its benefits, but also I think there are a lot of common misconceptions and misunderstandings around therapy as well. So let's talk about it. For me, the biggest thing I can say is, finding the right therapist is like finding the right relationship. Your first therapist that you sit with and talk to may or may not be a good fit. And I think for some people, they're like, man, I tried therapy, it didn't work. But it ain't even necessarily that the therapy itself didn't work. You just might not have had, the right counselor, and that's okay. This is my third therapist. I started therapy back in 2022 when I first got diagnosed with dermatomyositis. I don't go, I go when I feel like I need it. Like when I first got diagnosed, I went for a few sessions and I felt okay. And then maybe last year I picked it back up and went for like 6 or 7 sessions and I felt okay. And then within this last month, I'm picking it back up again. So, it's there when you need it, but it's not necessarily, for some people go once a month just for years. For others like me, I kind of dip into it as I need it. That's just me. But my point is, don't get discouraged if you've tried it and you feel like, oh, it didn't work for me. It could have just not been the right therapist. Again, my first therapist, it was cool. It was my first time in therapy. I felt like I could go, vent, release, and that was fine. And that worked for the moment. And then my second therapist was like an older lady, so I feel like I was just talking to my grandma. But, I would come there and talk about my problems, and, literally she'd be like, yeah, okay, baby, that's all right. Like a grandma. And so it was like, okay, that's comforting, but that was good for the moment. Now what I have going on, like I actually need to learn how to lean into emotions. I need to learn healthy coping mechanisms. I need to learn, not to suppress or deal with stress in my body and stuff like that. So it's like I need that next level of therapy now. And I feel like that's what I'm getting with my current therapist, which is great. But like I said, it's levels to it. You might, each therapist, depending on what you're battling with, and each session will be different, but it's a lot to learn about yourself and just how to deal with everything that's on our plate. So some of the misconceptions that I've heard about therapy, the biggest one is that it's for crazy people. I just want to shoot that down. If you go to therapy, that don't mean you're crazy. You don't have to be on one end of the extreme or the other. I have a lot on my plate. I'm dealing with a chronic illness, just the stresses of life, stresses in my body. Like, I just want to understand what's happening with my emotions and what's happening with my body. But I do not think, oh, I'm crazy because I'm going. There is a difference between a psychiatrist and a therapist. Some people need meds for anxiety. Some people need meds for PTSD. All those things, that still don't make you crazy, but you see different specialists for those things. And I think sometimes people lump it all into one, like, oh, a therapist means you need meds. And that's not always the case. There are some with prescriptive authority, but, again, who I'm seeing as a therapist, she can't prescribe me any medicine. But maybe she can escalate it if she thought I needed it. My point is, it's a misconception that therapy or even going to a psychiatrist is for crazy people. If you go seek help through therapy or just an outlet through therapy, you're far from crazy. You're actually in your right mind getting the help you need so that you don't feel like you're battling the woes of life alone. So again, it's not for crazy people, it's for everybody. And it ain't, when I say everybody, I mean from kids on up. Your kids can go to therapy. You know, kids have emotions, kids deal with things, you know, so it's for everybody. It's not just for, quote, crazy people or even people going through. I think that's another misconception. Therapy is for like couples when they struggling, or somebody like me who just had a lot on their plate. Like, the worst time to try to find a therapist is when you desperately need a therapist. And so even if your life is, going pretty well, it's nothing wrong with still seeking counsel, because all it is just allowing you to vent, allowing you to release, and then learning things about yourself and things about just coping in healthy ways. Because I just think the average person, we really don't have the right coping mechanisms. We just don't. So another common misconception is that it's expensive. I feel like now that more people are open to going to therapy, adopting the thought of therapy and things like that, there's so many different outlets. You have little apps like BetterHelp, I think that's the name of it, where you literally can text a therapist, do video chats, and it's pretty affordable, $100 or less. That's not the only therapist app similar to that. My personal therapist is covered by my insurance, but I do pay a $30 copay when I go. My first two were 100% free because a lot of jobs have employee assistance programs. So just look into what your options are, because if you really, really need therapy or you want to talk to somebody, the hope is that money wouldn't deter you, because there are resources out there. And again, you don't have to see a therapist every single day. So let's say the therapist is $75 for a session. You might go once or twice a month. Just look at what your options are and then work out a budget, because it really is worth the investment, especially if you need it. And so those are just a few of the common misconceptions I could think of off the top of my head. Now, my experience, for me, it's been a positive outlet for a non-biased party. So what I mean by that is I have a lot going on with my health, and people who love you, your parents, your friends, your family, they need to know what's going on with you. But sometimes I just feel like, am I burdening them by just telling them all this stuff? Because with me, it's something to do every other minute. So it's just like, and some days I struggle, some days, I just get in my head about everything. And so it's just like, and this might be the wrong way of thinking of it, but I don't want to always just call on friends and family to just dump all that. Everybody got a lot going on. So for me, therapy has been good for me to just kind of be like, I'm feeling like this, I'm worried about that, blah, 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 and kind of essentially dump it on somebody who don't know me. My therapist will help me in the moment, but she won't internalize it when she goes home like, oh my God, Jordan was going through this and going through that, whereas my family or friends might worry a little bit. And so for me personally, it's been a good outlet from a non-biased party. That don't mean I'm not still, confiding in friends and family and letting them know what's going on. But it's just like, you have that one friend or family member or whoever that every time you see them, they're like almost trauma dumping on you. Well, you love them, so then you internalize that. That could be a lot. And so for me, therapy is just like, let me dump everything on my therapist. She can give me some advice, kind of some guidance, some ways to reframe my thoughts. And then she done with it and I'm done with it. It's just, I like that. Another thing is, it's helped me develop healthier coping mechanisms. And so, for me, I didn't even realize until probably my last session with my therapist that I'm struggling with anxiety. To me, I've always thought of anxiety as panic attacks and breaking down and freaking out and overthinking. But the truth of the matter is, since me having this surgery, I've been not breaking down and stuff, but I'll be overthinking in my head. And it's kind of gotten ridiculous. Like, I go from 0 to 100 with my thoughts. The other day I had a rough day, carrying groceries in the house. I had to call my dad to come help me. Because that's another thing with dermatomyositis. Sometimes you'll have weakness and pain and you just can't do certain stuff. And I remember thinking, and it had been raining that day. So anytime, it's kind of like, with me at least, when it rains and the weather changes, I get achy. I didn't even consider any of that. When I got in the car and realized I don't think I'm gonna be able to get my groceries in, I'm gonna have to call my dad, I just went to a whirlwind of thoughts like, see, the fact that I'm calling my dad means that my disease is getting worse and it's progressing. And now every time I go to the store, I'm going to have to call my dad and blah, blah. So I just went into this big spiral of thoughts that, number one, weren't true. And number two, that hadn't even happened yet. And that's a form of anxiety. And for me, it's like mine is secondary to medical trauma. Having to deal with this type of an illness and then going through this surgery and it not going how I planned, that's traumatic. And it can lead to anxiety. And so I feel like if I wasn't in therapy, number one, I wouldn't have been able to identify that as what is actually happening. And number two, it would just get worse over time. So, that's, again, just some things I'm learning. Like, dang, anxiety looks different for everybody. For some, it might look like a breakdown. For others, it might be overthinking. For me, it's just being in my head and like conjuring up events that haven't even happened and probably won't happen. And so anyway, it's been good to kind of learn how to reframe my mind when things like that happen. Another thing that's been good for me with my experience is just leaning into my emotions and just releasing. I've been through a lot. I'm one of those people that's like, I'm strong, I don't cry, blah, blah. But that's not healthy. Like, that's not healthy. Suppressing your emotions and just moving on is not a sign of strength, honestly. I think a lot of times we think of it like that, like, she's so strong, she pushing on through. Oh, yeah, she looking good despite everything. That's great. But if you feel sad, feel sad. If you feel mad, feel mad. If you feel worried, I can't say feel worried. You got to stand on faith. But my point is, emotions are neither negative or positive. They're energy. So it's like you need to feel them. And so I'm learning that, like, I don't really lean into my emotions. I don't even know how to feel some of these emotions. So again, without therapy, I would just think what I was doing was the right way to cope, the right way to push forward, because I'm like, well, I'm still pushing. That don't necessarily mean there's not a better way. So again, therapy can kind of open your eyes to some things and help you unlearn some particular behaviors. But overall, I'm just learning more about myself and trying to lean into my emotions and just become more emotionally mature. It's gonna take time, but it's just a path of self-discovery. And I think sometimes that's why people don't want to do therapy, because they don't want to learn about themselves. You gonna learn about yourself. And some of it is gonna surprise you. Some of it you already know. Some of it you didn't know. And so I think that's also a fear people have with starting therapy, because they're like, I don't want to know why I'm like that. I don't want to tap into that time in my childhood. Nope. But it's good for you, because we holding up a lot of stress and energy and just feelings from way back when. And for some, it can literally make you sick. So getting that out, learning it, dealing with it, and, progressing, it's nothing wrong with that. So just a few things before I wrap up, like, of things that I've learned that I feel like are practical that's helped me and may help you. Or like I mentioned earlier, emotions are energy. So they're neither positive or negative. I think a lot of times when we say, oh, I feel sad, or I feel hurt, or I feel depressed, or even I feel happy and I feel excited, blah, 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 we look at that like those are the negative emotions and those are the positive emotions. But the truth of the matter is, emotions are energy. They're neither negative or positive. Some are uncomfortable, some make you vulnerable, some make you feel naked, but it's not a bad thing if you're sad. It's not a bad thing if you feel defeated for the day. It's not a bad thing even if you feel a little bit worried. You're a human. You're going to have emotions. And I think, like, for me, I look at it, or prior to starting therapy, I looked at it as negative and positive. So it's like, if I feel sad, that's negative. I don't want to feel that suppressed. And it's like, well, no, you need to feel that, because otherwise that energy is in you. And guess what it leads to? Inflammation, pain, etc. And so one thing that I learned is, if you suppress your emotions like me, I'm like, I don't like feeling sad, so I'm just going to suppress it and I ain't going to feel that. Well, you also end up suppressing happy feelings too. And so my therapist called it emotional compression, where you built up this type of defense mechanism where you don't want to feel the sad stuff, So you got your plan on how you're gonna suppress that. But then when a happy or a gleeful or a joyful moment comes, you actually suppressing that too. And she not lying, because sometimes when I have like a good day, I be thinking, for a moment, I'm thinking, okay, what I'm doing is working. The natural stuff is working. My body's getting stronger. I'm gonna beat this. And then almost immediately, I'm like, well, no, it's probably because I took a BC powder that I don't got pain. Oh no, I'm sure by tomorrow, And so it's like, you don't really ever feel the quote happy emotions either. And so one of the hardest emotions for just anybody to feel is joy, because you just feel like, nah, I'm just waiting on the shoe to drop. Especially if you're somebody that's been through a lot, you just almost feel like, nah, is this too good to be true? I'm sure as soon as I turn around, it's gonna be something. And so that's why you have to learn how to lean into what emotions make you feel vulnerable and uncomfortable, so that you can fully experience those emotions that make you feel happy and strong and hopeful as well. Because if you compress it on both sides, then you're not feeling nothing. And we're humans. We have to feel emotions. I'll also say, like I said, suppressing the emotion and moving on is a defense mechanism. It is not healthy coping. So if you are one of the people that's like, I just take it off the cuff, I just take it off the shoulder, like I just gotta keep pushing, that's actually not good. You need to learn how to lean into that stuff, feel that stuff, even if it's for the moment, even if it's for the day, and then push forward. Because otherwise, you gonna, get down the line and have a lot of pent-up energy in the form of unreleased emotions. Again, it's okay to feel the emotion. We're human, but you don't have to come into agreement with it. So if you feel anxious in the moment, you gonna have that. Like even me, when I was talking about my mind just racing and I'm thinking all this stuff, I'm gonna have that. I'm hyper focused and aware of what my body is doing because I have a chronic illness. So I'm gonna have that, but I don't have to come into agreement with it. I don't have to sit there for hours overthinking and just having my brain be like a tornado. You don't have to come into agreement with the emotion. You can feel it. Okay, I feel anxious. Let me reframe my thoughts, and focus on the reality of the moment and not on stuff that hasn't even happened. So speaking of reframing, that was one of the mechanisms that she was teaching me. So for example, whenever I went to this spiral of thoughts about not being able to bring the groceries in, had I been able to identify that moment as an anxious moment, then I could have done this. But I could have reframed my mind and said, you know what, it is raining, so that's probably why I feel achy. And, my dad did tell me if I ever needed him to call him, so that's my support. Let me just call him. And even when my dad brought in the groceries, he even said, like, this is heavy. So that validated what I was feeling, that it was too heavy. But the point is, the reality of it is, it doesn't necessarily mean the disease is progressing. It doesn't necessarily mean you're weak. It doesn't necessarily even mean that you'll never be able to get your own groceries in. The reality of the moment was it was a rainy day already. I woke up achy. I have literally $250 worth of groceries. That is heavy, even for a grown man. And I need support, period. And so I think reframing, like when you in those moments, just stop, take a deep breath, and then literally think about I don't even want to say think about the rational, because when you have irrational thoughts, you're not in your frontal cortex of your brain. Your brain is just firing. And that's how people have panic attacks. That's how people get anxious. And sometimes that's even how people fall into depression, because the rational thought process, their frontal cortex is turned off. And they are just thinking, and it's literally like a tornado. You just like, what if, and now that mean, and blah, blah, blah. So it's hard to think rationally in an irrational moment, but you can reframe by literally in the moment identifying, okay, I think I'm getting a little anxious. Take a deep breath. And then even if you think about one thing that's the reality of the moment, like, okay, I did wake up achy because it's raining. That kind of will help you get out of fight or flight brain. And so again, I'm just now learning this stuff. I ain't saying I didn't master this stuff, but it's better to be aware of it than to not be aware and just think that's your norm. Well, I'm always anxious. My mind always racing and both. No, we got to get control of that so that we can regulate our nervous system and it can help us heal. Anyway, the only other thing I can think of right now is that I've learned is just creating a calm, safe space in your mind. For me, I remember when I went to Jamaica, this was of course so long ago. I went to Jamaica maybe like in 2016, 2017. And I remember That was probably the nicest ocean I've ever been to, in Montego Bay, Jamaica. And I just laid in the ocean for literally 2 hours on my back, floating, spending time with God. It was so peaceful. I gotta go back there. I think I actually took a nap, just like floating. I was like a little dead body floating. I remember that. And I was in that water for 2 hours straight, because that's how peaceful it was. And so that's my calm, safe space. When I get in my head, or my brain is going a mile a minute, I start to think about that time on the beach in Montego Bay, Jamaica, when I was just on my back in the ocean. And so literally having that in your mind, whether it be a place you've actually been or somewhere you just imagine, something that gives you peace, have that go-to calm, safe space in your mind. So once you get in a whirlwind of anxiety or worry or fear or whatever it may be, depression, dark thoughts, that you can bring yourself back, a couple of deep breaths, bring yourself back to something that brings you peace, because that's how you take captive your mind. At the end of the day, all these techniques are just to help us regulate and control our minds, so that we can then regulate and control our emotions, and then we can regulate and control our nervous system and heal. And we're not dealing with all this, in my case, chronic illnesses. Like, this stuff just is energy pent up in you. And so you are in control. It's your brain. It's your mind. You just have to sometimes have a little bit of help on how to regulate and take captive these thoughts, because it's a lot happening. It's a lot of stimulation all the time. Our brains are always in fight or flight. Our minds are really literally never turned off. Nobody you hear people say, take a deep breath and blah, blah, but in the moment, that you ain't thinking about none of that. All that is out the window. And so that's why it's helpful to go to therapy to learn some of these mechanisms, so that, because sometimes it is as simple as taking a deep breath. Sometimes it is as simple as finding that calm, safe space in your brain. But if nobody's ever taught you that or showed you how that can help you in certain moments, you don't even know to do it. And so you think it's the norm when your mind races. You think it's the norm, so you just like, oh, what I normally do is X, Y, and Z. And those may or may not be healthy coping mechanisms. So things that I've learned is anxiety looks different for everyone. I never even considered that I would be an anxious person, or somebody who overthinks, or someone who, I just didn't even think of it until, I kind of just, my therapist is always like, tell me about your week, blah, blah, blah. And I was just telling different things. She was like, girl, all of that sound like anxiety. And I'm like, that's a mess, But, again, learning these things about yourself, leaning into these emotions, and then using healthy coping mechanisms and techniques, it's going to take time. But I'm going to get there, and hopefully you get there too. So, again, if you watching this and you like, I kind of overthink sometimes, I kind of do that, and you're right, I really don't feel my emotions. I just keep pushing, blah, blah, blah. It may be time to talk to somebody, and there's nothing wrong with that. I actually think the strongest people are those who know when they need support. And so that was the other thing I was going to mention. I'm the type of person, I'm so independent, I don't really like to ask for help. That's why it was hard for me to call my dad when I needed help getting the groceries in. I sat in the car like, should I call him, or should I just make 3 trips, or should I? And it was just like, just call him. But my therapist made a good point. She was like, if you don't like help because you just independent and you don't feel like you want to burden or bother nobody, think of it and reframe your mind to think of it as support. That's what it essentially is. People who love you and want to see you doing well will support you. And therapy is just another level of support. So if you, in a hard time, or even if you're not, but you like, I could use a little bit of support on how to feel my emotions. I could use a little bit of support on how to deal with this change in my life. Think of it that way. It's not, oh, I need help. Ooh, she needs some help. It's like, I just need support. And honestly, that's biblical. We need community. We need each other. Whether it's your therapist or your mama, or your therapist and your friend, or your therapist and your pastor, whoever, everybody needs support. And so I think if we kind of reshift our focus on what therapy really means, then more people will be open to it. And so, yeah, that's just what I'm learning so far. I figure it might help people who are going through. Hopefully it did. If not, well, it did. It's going to help. So anyway, I definitely encourage everybody to look into what options you have for therapy. If you've been to therapy, comments below some of the things you've learned and some of the mechanisms you've used, as it may help someone else. But until next time, thanks for tuning in.